Hey, good evening, everybody. How are we doing tonight? Okay? Okay, we're dry, we're cold. We're dry. We went wet, but we're cold. I'm Pat Marcarelli, president of the Council of Beaches here in the town of Westbrook. I'd like to welcome everybody this evening. Tonight we're going to have a presentation from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I think I got that right. I'm still used to plain DEP. Before I introduce everybody, I'd like to first thank, we have a couple of students from our wonderful Westbrook High School that are going to be recording this meeting tonight. This is their first venture out doing this, a program like this, so we'd like to thank them. And you probably recognize some of them. And a couple of our usual volunteers. We have Marcus Little and Darlene Briggs, as most of you know, as well. And thanks to Ken Butterworth, our town our IT specialist, to help us set this up, along with Valley Shore Cable TV. That all being said, the only thing I need to plug from the Council of Beaches is coming December 3rd on Saturday, December 3rd. I think I got that right, from 9 to 1. We'll be doing our annual Stuff a Cruiser with food this year up at the Westbrook outlets. It's 9 to 1, so please bring foods and money, and bring your money too. Yeah, okay, but you know the routine. So without further ado and me taking any more time, hopefully I didn't leave anybody out. I'd like to also thank our First Selectman, John Hall, third, for allowing us to use the facility here tonight, the members of the Council of Beaches, and the different commissions and so forth being represented here in town to attend this tonight's event. I'm now going to introduce Katie Perzanowski, from, she's, I think, an analyst, whatever, okay, from DEEP. I'm going to have Kathleen come to the podium. She'll introduce the rest of her wild team of conspirators here to present a program regarding this new, as you see on the screen, the guide to licensing, activities, and permitting and so forth for our beach associations. And this is throughout the Connecticut, state of Connecticut. And they're so very happy. And oh, you know, I'd be remiss. Our town planner, Peter Gillespie, helped me set this whole thing up. He's the one that got me going on this program. We got the initial copy. We contacted the state and said, hey, look, let's move forward with this. Because as you know, we here in Westbrook are very proactive. The Council of Beaches is very proactive. We have the resiliency committees coming up right down the road here. So Peter and I said, hey, this is a good idea. And we say, hey, this is a great idea for the town of Westbrook to get in the lead on this. And I went to Kathleen. She said, this is great. So they welcomed the opportunity to come here to be the first in the state, run this program, and then I guess we get off and running from there, right? So, something like that? Good. So, okay, Kathleen, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm Katie Perzanowski. I'm an environmental analyst with the Land and Water Resources Division at DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. So I'm here today with my supervisor, Brian Golumbewski. He's the supervisor of the enforcement program with Land and Water Resources Division, or we call it L-word. So if you hear us saying L-word, that's what we're referring to. I'm also here with Diane Ivkovic. She handles FEMA, flooding, flood management. Without further ado, here's Brian.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for showing up. I wanted to give you a little bit of insight on why we're here and why we're doing outreach things like this manual here. Before about a year ago, we didn't have a standalone enforcement section. So we were kind of lumping enforcement in with permitting, and other responsibilities. And about a year ago, we reorganized and we have our own standalone enforcement section. And they actually staffed it, which is always good too. So I have Katie here and Diane. And so we decided we weren't just going to do your standard enforcement anymore, just NOVs or notices of non-compliance, and just sort of be reactive. So this is sort of our idea of now doing compliance, I guess we would call it assistance or compliance assurance, where we want to get information out. We want people to have the information they need on the different activities, and contact us before we see violations, because it'll be a lot easier for, I think, all of us if we can communicate and kind of talk the same language on some of these things. And I hope this is a first sort of, I guess, a first pass at that. So the reason we picked beach associations was we were getting a bunch of violations, and it wasn't actually this part of the state. It was the western end and the eastern end. And it was a bunch of beach associations. And we were having problems with beach raking and beach grading and nourishment and things like that, where they were doing activities that were regulated by us, and we can get into that. And so we decided that, you know, if we see these 6 beach associations, you know, and working with them on getting into compliance, you know, it's probably pretty uniform across the shoreline that, you know, these people were doing things and they didn't really know what, you know, what activities were regulated, who regulated what. And so we decided to do this to sort of provide some information so that, you know, if you guys have your meetings and you say, hey, we want to do this, we want to do nourishment, or we want to put a dock out, this will hopefully at least get you on the path to the right person at our department. And then we can talk about how to do things properly and what's permittable and what's not. And then we can avoid enforcement. So this is sort of our investment on the front end, so we don't have to issue a notice of violation to a beach association, because we don't want to. I'll tell you that right now. We don't really want to. So I am going to start, and we decided just to go through with it, just through page by page. And if you have questions, just raise your hand. This is going to be very informal. You know, we don't really have, you know, we're not on a time limit, and it's not a canned production. This is, you know, just basically our first time out, and we want your input. We want to make sure this is something that you guys understand, that's helpful. And then if you can give us any ideas on maybe something we're missing, something that, you know, you would want to know and have in a reference. So if we just go through this, it does have a table of contents. We brainstormed, we used what we had for our interactions with beach associations, so we came up with some activities that were common in our communications up to this point with beach associations, and then we rounded it out with some things that we thought may be important or interesting for you guys. So we kind of brainstormed and said, what is the universe of activities that a beach association may want to do, may want to implement, or put, you know, what are common activities that you guys do on the beach? You know, what do you want to do? And we'll try to give you a framework for what needs a permit, what it doesn't need a permit. And so our first thing, and I don't know, Katie, she's very patient with me. I said, I want a poster. I want a poster that shows all these things. And so this was sort of our first cut on, this would be your association, and these are the things that we think that, you know, this is what we see commonly at your properties. And it's a mix of, you know, different management of the beaches, different, you know, facilities, you know, boating access, swimming access, groins, and then we, you know, because we're deep, we have to mix in some stuff like tidal wetlands and important critters and things like that, and public access and public trust. So we have to add some of that in there. This here, you can't, it means nothing to you from this distance, but it was our, and again, I go, Katie, we need something that says what, in the left column are all the activities that you would want to do. In the middle column, and it's funny, we used easiest permit option, because I figure everyone wants the easy button, right? So easiest permit option. So, and what we did too is we gave you hyperlinks, and I don't know, you know, I'm 32 years at the department, so I'm learning as I go too. I'm not tech savvy, that's why I have Katie. But all these links, if you click on it, it should get you to where there's instructions for permits and forms and how to submit it. So we're hoping that that's exactly how it works. Oh, and it's on our website. So we can give you the link. So, so if you don't have this form, you could always, it is on our website too. So you don't have to have this in hand. You can just Google it and find it on our website. And then this is the column of, if you don't meet some of these permit things, then either you have to get a big permit that costs a lot of money or you can't do it. So that's the column you probably want to stay out of. So let me just quickly tell you about our jurisdiction, because I think that's an important thing. You know, we have 2 programs that would regulate what you do at a beach. And one is called the Structures, Dredging, and Fill Act. And that regulates any structures you put in the water, any dredging, any filling, any encroachments. And we have a jurisdiction. It used to be, well, a long time ago, it used to be mean high water, very long time ago, before 1987. 1987, we went to the high tide line. We were having trouble with the high tide line because it was a negotiation every time we went out. It was like, where's the rack line, where's the water? And so, this was before my time, we decided, before I was in Office of Long Island Sound Programs, is we were going to go with a coastal jurisdiction line. So basically, we came up with an elevation for every town, which is our jurisdiction. And it's based on a statistic, it's the average of the highest high tides over the past 20 or so years. And so every town, we know now what elevation, and on your property, if you had a surveyor go out, you'd know where our deep jurisdiction is. So on a beach, a lot of times, our jurisdiction is usually only on the lower end of the beach if you have a nice broad beach. Now, if you have a narrow beach with a seawall and water hits the seawall, we probably regulate all of it. So depends how much of your beach is there. If you get high tide, if you have a lot of your beach still there, we're not going to regulate that upper part for the most part. But if you're in a situation where you have a eroding beach or a narrow beach, our jurisdiction may be almost your entire beach. We also regulate tidal wetlands. What's that? So that's my division, Land and Water Resources Division. So so deep, so like we love acronyms, right? So deep, DEP, we're in the Bureau of Land and Water Reuse, so WPLR, if you know the radio station, so it's WPLR, L-word, and then even enforcement and compliance section, so we're the EC. So yeah, so it's Land and Water Resources Division. We used to be Office of Long Island Sound Programs, but we combined with the Inland Water Resources Division, so we combined that up. So just jurisdictional wise, the other datums that we usually want to know about is mean high water and mean low water when we make some decisions, and some of our permitting eligibility criteria. You can't do, like, you can be covered, well, we'll get to it, but mean low water, we don't want anyone really messing around below mean low water for the most part. And so now we're going through, we pick different resources. So as you go through this, you're going to look at different resources and different activities. And one of the things, I don't know in your situations whether you have a lot of dunes or not, but for the most part, I found Connecticut doesn't have a lot of dunes. And it's unfortunate. And I don't know if it's sins of the past where we removed them and put houses there. Maybe it's the nature that we're not really a state that has barrier beaches. I don't know why, but dunes are really important. So if you do have them or would like to, you know, restore some or whatever, they're really an important resource for your beaches. They serve a bunch of different functions, and I don't want to bore you, but someone told me once they were the battery of the beach. So if you have a dune, that's where, when you get high water events and flood events, it's where your sand is stored. So if you have a situation where you don't have a lot of sand in your system, there's probably nowhere for that sand in high flood, high water events to be stored anywhere. Another nice thing about dunes is, it's been shown over a lot of the major hurricanes and superstorms, they do create a buffer to significant storm events, inundation, other damage. If you have dunes, your properties, your houses, and roads and such will have less damage. It's just a fact from some of the studies post Sandy and so now we did this alphabetical. I'm not sure if we should have. Maybe we should have a resource activity section. We're still working on this, but beach grading. So most beach associations probably annually do some level of beach grading, and we actually have a general permit for that, and it's a non-reporting general permit. So you actually are covered as long as you meet the criteria of that general permit. And I don't want to go into every little aspect of it, but pretty much grading is not nourishment. So you can't bring new sand in. You can move what so during the winter, maybe sand gets pulled around or pushed around. Grading, this general permit lets you basically reposition it and put it where, it best serves your association and recreation. But it doesn't let you fill tidal wetlands. We don't want you to go below mean low water, so you would only be from mean low water up to the coastal jurisdiction line, Cjl, that's our jurisdiction. And whatever you do landward of that is not under our jurisdiction. It would only, if for whatever reason the town had some reason to regulate, you would only be under local regulation. The big thing with this is there is a seasonal restriction, and between April 1st and September 15th, we don't want you to do grading. You would not be covered by your permit if you did any type of grading during that period. And the reason for that is and we'll see later in here, we have shore birds that nest in that period. We have horseshoe crabs that come up and spawn at that period. And then we do have other migratory birds that utilize the beach during that period. So it's funny, it's a general permit, but it really only lets you grade like pre-season and post-season. So it doesn't really give you sort of we're not allowing you to grade under this general permit during really the recreation season. Now, you can ask for a waiver from that, but you would have to then hire someone that says horseshoe crabs don't spawn on your beach and birds don't nest on your beach. So you could do it, but if you just are covered under the general permit, we would prohibit you from actually grading between April 1st and September 15th. Any comments, questions? Yeah.
I've had the last couple of years somebody from your department come down to Levine to actually kind of test off an area with a piping plover.
Oh, okay.
So that we could clean the beach, but not in that particular area.
Great. Is that Laura Saucier?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's great.
For the Mile Creek Beach Club.
Oh, okay.
That was actually staked off and tape around. So we had to stay away from that area.
Great. That's nice to hear. Yeah. Great. Yeah. not be covered under it, yes. So that would require actually a full permit and then probably some type of study of how littoral, sand is moving through your beach area. So that would be the far right column, the big cash. Like when you look in the restaurant is like $1 sign, that would be like the $4 sign restaurant, So I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying that would take, once we get below mean low water, we feel like we're getting into that sort of offshore movement. So it may seem simple, and maybe someone in this room has argued with me. They go, our sand is over there. I know our sand is over there. I just want to go get it. And I'll say, sorry, that's part of the natural process of, and that sand might be going and helping some other association somewhere else. And if you just paid to nourish your beach with that, and I'm telling you from the state, I'm telling you, you got to leave it there and let it go move where it's going to move. Yeah, you probably don't like me very much if I say that. That is the case, and people have talked about, like, I know it's funny, different states do stuff, pump, like, if you look at Florida and Mexico and stuff, they pump offshore onto the beaches. I don't really want to go because that's very site specific. You would need a study and such, but yeah, mean low water, we don't want you messing around. We consider that sort of part of the natural transport areas. Beach nourishment, and I don't know, I've just talked to Gary here. Gary, right? John. Gary's right there. Okay, yeah. So beach nourishment is, you would need a permit from our office. There's no general permit for it, but it is something that with the right amount of study, survey, the right material, we have aquaculture. We work with the Bureau of Aquaculture. They don't want sand from another state. So if you use sand from like hydric, aqueous, dredging materials, has to be from Connecticut. Otherwise, has to be an upland source that's pathogen-free, bacteria-free. So we don't take dredge spoils from other states. If you do beach nourishment, we'd want you to definitely study it. The thing with beach nourishment, I've seen it a few times. People that want to use the beach, they want nice sand, right? You want nice sand, you want to lay on it, you want it on your feet, feels good. A lot of Connecticut's beaches aren't, my friend calls, the guy works in calls it sugar sand from Florida. And a lot of Connecticut's beaches are cobblier, gravelier. So if you put sugar sand on gravel, guess where it's going to go eventually? It's going out, yeah. Yeah.
There are a lot of associations that I deal with. They're always asking me where they should get their sand from. I think this may be an opportunity for you to explain to them that they just can't mention sand and gravel sand to get sand from the beach.
Sure.
Because a lot of them are doing that.
Okay.
And the other thing is
Yeah,
about...
you can take the microphone.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing is a lot of the dredging material that you speak about, I've seen a lot of it when it goes on the beaches. The color is totally different. The texture is different. And a lot of times large holes are dug and bury the dredge material and then cover it over with existing sand. But over a period of time, that dredging material bleeds to the surface and totally discolors the beach and adds a funky smell to it.
Yeah. So we just did that at Hammonasset a few years ago, and we had actually a deep picnic there, and we were right after and it came from the Housatonic River dredge, and it was very gray. It reduced, had a you know, sort of almost a rotten egg smell, and it had a lot of shell debris in it and stuff.
So you may be able to get away with it on the public beaches, but
Yeah.
you're not going to get away with it on these private beaches.
Yeah.
These people will flip out.
Yeah, I mean, the only places I see where it works is where you're collecting your own sand. Like there was somewhere, and I think it's in Groton, where they collect, for whatever reason, their boat ramp collects the sand from their beach. So every year they go in and they just kind
That's
of,
Esker Beach.
maybe, yeah. Yes, you're right. So basically the sand, you know, if you use dredge materials, you may not entirely love what you're going to get, but we do allow that. It's called beneficial reuse. The only problem is there's not a lot of sandy dredge materials in Connecticut. Most of our dredge materials are silky, mucky materials that come in from the smaller creeks and rivers. But, all right. Beach raking. So that is an activity that I do see a lot at a lot of the different beaches in Connecticut. And it is covered by the general permit, but there is also a seasonal restriction to it. And this is where we've had some previous enforcement issues with other associations because the restricted period is May 10th to July 15th. So Memorial Day and July 4th are right in that restricted period. So, I have had some problems with that, but that is protective again of horseshoe crabs and some of the birds like piping plover and other shore nesting birds. The one thing you can do during that period is hand rake. Or I guess either hand rake, maybe drag something, and we have, and I'm not sure where we came up with it, we have, it can't be deeper than a 2-inch tine or whatever you want to call it. So if you do it at that period, you can't do motorized, you'd have to do it by hand. I don't know really how sensible that is or not, but I don't know. So. And then boating access. So this page we wanted to get at, and I know some associations have both beaches and some type of marinas or docks. I don't know how many here have sort of that mixed use. But we just wanted to have a page that kind of lets you know that, you know, there are certain, you're going to need some permit for a new, some type of new, whether it's a boat ramp, float, mooring. You have harbor masters, depends on where you are. You may have a harbor master to get a mooring, but there are certain permits that you would need for those I guess you want to call them boat access structures. And we have a bunch of different links there. There is what's called a certificate of permission. So if you do have some older structures there, if they're pre-95, you get an easier permit process if it's not currently authorized. Boat storage, as long as it's above the coastal jurisdiction line, so as long as you're landward of really that tidal range, we wouldn't regulate that. That would be a town issue.
Boat trespassing speed limits, any of those restrictions from the shore?
Yeah, there are some speed limitations. I think it's within 50 feet of the shoreline for operating a vehicle. That's our NCON guys in our boating division. And we do have links for them here. This is really, so my office, because it's structures, dredging, and fill, we're looking at the structures. So it's, you know, our standard would be a ramp to a pier to a ramp to a float, piers in the water. You know, that's mostly what we do, whether it's residential or whether it would be for an association. You want to grab the microphone?
That's okay.
Yeah, they're trying to
okay,
record
okay,
it,
okay.
so your question might
So,
help someone
so
else.
what I was wondering about is, again, going back to, say, a rack, and is there any regulation as far as, you know, if it's, trying to picture this, so let's say you want to be laying down on the beach, and behind you is a boat rack, some kind of kayak rack or whatever. The fact that people are going to be coming and going, moving those boats.
That
let's
would
say.
be more of your association on how you want to manage your property. Like as long, so this is sort of how I'm a bureaucrat, right? So if it's above my line, I don't care where you put your kayak rack, actually, as long as it's not in the wetlands and it's not disturbing a state listed species. Okay. So, but for you, for your associations, I would hope that you meet, you know what I mean, and you say, this is where our storage goes, this is where people are going to park, this is where our facilities are. I mean, I don't know, and I don't know even if some of those probably aren't even subject to building codes locally, I would think, right? A kayak rack is probably not, yeah. So it really is going to be your association on where they want to locate them. And then there would be private property also. I'm not sure exactly the interface on some of your associations where, if you have your own private property, as long as you're outside of tidal wetlands or the coastal jurisdiction line, you could put it probably anywhere on your private property.
Okay, so the line that you're referring to, was it the
CJL, yeah,
Right.
coastal jurisdiction line.
that's subject to change depending on the water. In other words,
So it used to be. Now we have a specific elevation. So for every town, we have an elevation.
yeah, I saw that. It's like, I think Westbrook is like 3 point
3.2.
Right.
Yeah.
But if the tide in the water, let's say during the course of a storm,
Yep.
obviously water is going to get closer. Is that still not,
So
is that subject to change?
Yeah, well, so not, we wouldn't change it just because, that certain times
Right.
you get a king
I got
tide
it,
or
yeah.
you get a spring tide or whatever. So the answer to that is it wouldn't change our jurisdiction. Now, we based our current CJL on older data from it's called an EPOCH, E-P-O-C-H, and we actually just finished a new one. So I think at some point we will update it. Now whether that changes the CJL, we're going to then then we'll statistically take the highest high tides of the most recent epoch, which is what, 19 years? I think it's a 19-year period. So that might change. And it might be reflective of maybe some higher tides, but overall, no. If you get a spring tide and it floods, or you get low pressure with wind coming from a certain direction and a spring tide at the same time, I'm kind of a nerd.
So theoretically, that structure can be in the water at that time?
During a certain storm event or a certain high tide, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it wouldn't be subject to our jurisdiction. Now, for the management of your association, maybe you want to move it back 10 feet. I don't know. You know what I mean? But,
All right.
but yeah, from a jurisdictional and permitting wise, it would really have no effect right now.
Okay.
All right, we're going to jump into the fascinating world of FEMA. Diane Iskovic.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave it. You can't hear me. Hello, all. My name is Diane Iskovic. I work at Deep. Brian's my boss. Katie's my coworker. I deal with what people call the FEMA program. Some people call it flood management. Some people call it the National Flood Insurance Program. So if you're thinking of Florida right now, I want you to keep all those pictures in your head and all those problems. That's me in Connecticut. Just a little bit of background. I only have this one slide. I'm the best person in this group. So, but I'm going to be here for like 5 minutes or so. So, and it's going back to them. So, quick and dirty what the FEMA program is if you don't know, or the National Flood Insurance Program. It's been around since 1968. It's a federal law. The crux of it is there's flood regulations that deal with construction. So I'm going to go back to this gentleman right here who's not looking at me right now, but with the boat raft. We're going to talk about that in a minute. That's what we're going to be talking about, things that are real structures, things that are kind of like development. That's what you're describing, okay? So we're going to get back to that in a minute. The FEMA program deals with flood maps, flood insurance, flood regulations, okay? And they all kind of weave together. Every town in Connecticut participates in this program. It's voluntary. Voluntary with like a gun to your head. Because if you don't participate, people can't get flood insurance through the program, therefore, and it's a requirement of a mortgage, so therefore you can't sell a house. So everybody in Connecticut, every town participates. Every town has ordinances or regulations from the feds that they adopt into local regulations, and you can get flood insurance no matter where you are, in the floodplain, outside the floodplain. Okay, so if somebody tells you, we don't have maps, blah, 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 I'm dispelling that myth right now. So the first thing we'll do is the map. So this is kind of, this graphic here on the screen is a real simplified version of a flood map. It's kind of looking sideways. Usually a map, you're looking down on it. You guys, for your purposes in a beach, are always going to be in a regulated zone. Most likely. You're going to be in that V zone there. V stands for velocity. So think of it, right at the very shoreline. You go back a little bit maybe. You're in something called the coastal A zone. Still wave action. Again, treated like a velocity zone. So go back a little bit more. Maybe that's your parking lot. You're still in a flood zone back here. And maybe go a little bit further back. Maybe you got another little area. Maybe you're outside the flood zone, but probably not. So I guess my point is you're in a highly regulated zone. Don't ever think you don't need permits from the town. So all permits Brian was describing are permits through our department because you're below that water line, that low 3 or 4 elevation. These permits, so you still need permits to build anything in these flood zones. And they're through your town though, they don't come to us. So you might have, multiple permits, multiple jurisdictions. All right, so 2 things that FEMA is regulating. You said the word structure. FEMA calls a structure wall and roof. Okay? So I want you to think of the things that you have maybe that are walled and roof. A concession stand, a bathroom, a changing room, I wrote down some other ideas here, a little ticket booth, a little harbor master station, something like that. So what's not a structure? What else do they regulate? Development, the rack. Things that are not walled and roofed. So a picnic pavilion might be that. That roof, no walls, right? Just 4 posts. A rack, something like that. Something sticking out of the ground in a flood zone is still regulated, but it's called development. Again, this would all be through your town. So what that might have to be done is you need like a zoning permit, maybe a building permit from the town. So it'd be like the zoning officer. Okay, that's fine. But they maybe want you to go here first to make sure it's not in that, where it is. Maybe they're thinking where you're putting it. So a lot of it has to do where you're putting stuff. It could be that you need both permits, from the town and us. Sometimes you only need us. Sometimes you may only need the town. Sometimes you also need the Army Corps, potentially. There could be multiple jurisdictions, and it has to do with what you're doing and where you're doing it. Okay? So, in my mind, that's development, because you're putting it in a flood zone. So anytime you're in one of these zones, you want to go check with your town planner, your zoning officer, building official, whoever it is, to see. So what you might need to do there is anchor that sucker down to the ground. I wouldn't necessarily care where you put it. Where your logistics are, like what you're describing, like someone's going to get knocked in the head. I guess. But we care about things like debris fields, okay? So there you go. why don't you tell them? Because they don't want to listen to us.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you have a question, rather than making it just a personal conversation here, raise your hand, let Diana come by and put the microphone so the folks at home are going to be able to hear the questions, okay, that you have to ask, okay? Thank you.
Say they're good questions.
Yeah, they are very good questions, but we're having trouble even in the back of the room,
It's worth
okay?
hearing your questions.
So just bear with me. Thank you.
Sorry, okay. So again, when you're in these flood zones, anything needs a permit. It needs a permit through your zoning office because the FEMA regulations are a federal regulation that's then adopted into local codes, and then the town is responsible for administering it. My job is to kind of help the town and residents and other people understand it, help them when they have problems. For example, Peter, I see Marilyn Ozel's there, who's from Fenwick. I tend to deal with them a lot all day long on things like that. Questions like yours. Do I need a permit for this boat rack? What should we do? Should we move it? Blah, blah, blah. Okay? One of the slides that you had that you didn't really talk about, again, there's two kinds of regulations here. The state regulations once you go to a certain area and what they cover, and then what the town is covering, which is much further. So if you're looking at what the CJL is on that map, it's almost like right at the edge of the beach. But the FEMA regulations go all the way back until the floodplain ends. So it's a much deeper, jurisdiction. And again, it falls to the town. So things you might think of, we call things sometimes water dependent, right, in Connecticut regulations. Things that need to be near the water for like recreation, what else, public access, aquaculture, stuff like that. That's their side of the shop. The FEMA side of the shop doesn't really recognize that. They look at something called functionally dependent. Things that only need to really be there because they need access to water. And they only recognize like two things: docks, or things like port facilities, and ship repair. So I'll give you an example. You may have a marina, and it's got shipbuilding and repair in the building. But then the rest of it, part of it is a restaurant or public access, a dock. You buy your little parts. You have a bathroom with it. So you may say, oh, that's all water dependent, because they need to have all this stuff there for the boat, for the marina. FEMA only recognizes the repair part of that. The rest of that has to be elevated. All right, so most of the time in these situations, you see this little graphic here, the little house, the tree house, the oil rig. That's what, the oil rig. That's what you're looking at in your location. So that includes the bathrooms. So if you think of Hammonasset, if you've been there, when you see we have new bathrooms like with ramps, and they're giant. That's how they're designed now, because that's so. And I know you all got old bathrooms, old changing rooms. It doesn't mean you get to keep them that way if you want to replace them. They're going to have to be like this. All right? And I know that's a hard nut to swallow because I've heard it many times. There's no grandfathering of it. There's no. So this is what it means is if they're wiped off the face of the earth in a storm, when you rebuild them, you have to build them this way. That's called substantial damage. They've been damaged. So think of Florida. All that stuff is gone. When they rebuild it, in some cases, they're going to have to build stuff in the air. Same thing with improvement. So say it's at its useful end of its life. We have a lot of those right now. Bathrooms, municipal bathrooms, on the beach. They really can't be fixed anymore. They have to be elevated. So again, the only thing that you get a freebie on is a dock, because then it's more like development, and ship repair or building. So things like electric boat gets a freebie, shipyard even gets a freebie. You would be talking about where to put your boat, like a boat yard, is that what you meant? Okay, all right. But again, even boat yards, you gotta think, a lot of this stuff has to do with debris. I want you to think of Florida, right? A lot of the stuff that's the problem here is all this debris, boats, people's stuff all over the place. So again, it's regulating development, you're anchoring it down, moving it, that kind of stuff. Right, we're gonna implement our new rule.
What about the actual, let's say in this case, the kayaks? I mean, do they have to be secured on the rack? Because they could,
Preparedness, that would be more your, when you have a storm, you know, you should be having like a storm contingency plan, preparedness plan. So when you know a storm's coming, you're gonna move all this stuff. You know, you don't wanna lose it, right? Somebody doesn't wanna lose all the, and it's more than
well,
just boats.
not only lose, but, you know, hitting a building, let's say, or,
Correct.
you know, a debris,
It
whatever.
could be a lot of things, it could be picnic tables that you have out there, or racks, boats themselves, all kinds of different things. So I'm sure you probably do that anyway. It's something you would, you know a hurricane's coming, I'm sure your association goes out and takes all the junk, puts it away, parks it away.
We hope.
Well, I hope too. That's what I would tell you to do. You should be having like a storm contingency. And we're going to talk about that a little bit at the end. So we'll get there.
Okay.
Oh, there's another one.
You talk about walls, specifically seawalls. Repairs to, is that subject to regulation?
He's going to talk about that.
Oh, yes, that is. So seawalls generally are going to need some permit from us. If you are just looking to repair existing walls, likely there's an easier permit called the Certificate of Permission. You might hear COP. We do have a general permit that if we do end up having a hurricane or a significant storm, if our commissioner basically makes a declaration after, like, say what Florida's going through, you could repair it under this general permit. But just under normal conditions, if you need to repair your seawall, you're probably going to need a permit. Now, we do have a GP for handwork, so if you're just if you can do it by hand, you actually can get a non-reporting general permit. You need machinery, you need a permit from law. Okay? So if it's, you want to ask that question again? Yeah.
So you said your jurisdiction stops at the CJL line.
Yes.
If the seawall is above that line,
You
that's
would
still
not-
considered a deep,
No.
Okay.
So if you are above the coastal jurisdiction line, it would be a town permit you would need. And the one thing, and I don't know if anyone's ever heard this term, so there's the Connecticut Coastal Management Act, which is the umbrella program for everyone, state, feds, towns. And so seawalls and revetments, bulkheads, they're all considered flood and erosion control structures. So there's some limitations on where you can put them in. If you don't have one and you want one, you probably are not going to get it unless you're a water dependent use or DOT or a town where you're protecting public infrastructure. But if it's above the CJL, yeah, we wouldn't be involved, but the town. So you would probably get a coastal site plan review or a CAM review, right, or something like
most, I
that.
think Westbrook defers their cam reviews to deep.
They refer them to us, yes. So that's a whole nother thing, but yes. So even if it's not in our jurisdiction, if there is a coastal CAM review or a coastal site plan review, some by statute need to get referred to us if it's like a zoning change or a flood erosion control structure. And sometimes some towns have a really good relationship with some of our analysts, and they'll just forward all of them. We'll comment on them. And sometimes, we might say, no, we don't want a new wall there. But then it's up to the town at that point. We'd only be an advisory in that case.
So that's another good point. FEMA, because we have this permit program where it's below the CJL, they don't really regulate, well, it's kind of development, but we would let them be the lead on that. We don't get involved in that. Where it becomes a problem upland for us is if you're putting it too close to, say, that little thing on the gilt, and that's supposed to be open. And then we call that an obstruction. So that's where that would come into play on local lakes, when it's too close to one of those structures. If it's some little landscaping wall and it's way up the shore, probably not a big deal. Again, goes to the town. But if you're trying to wall that off, then you got problems. So I think the moral of the story is, and it says it on the bottom there, you know, always contact your local zoning officer and building official or land use department, whatever it is, whatever the town calls it. Every town's a little bit different. I know they say do it and ask forgiveness later, but to be honest with you,
We don't say that.
well, people say that. I don't say that. The problem is you'll do something, and I'm going to tell you right now, there's many a horror story that we hear. People do these things, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You end up ripping it out. You lose your beach season. Your association's mad at you. Blah, blah, blah. So we've had situations like that where, you know, they have to work through their beach season to fix these things, and then everyone's unhappy. So that's why I kind of was here. Oh, let's see what else I got here. So alternatives, I'm just going to give you quick alternatives to structures. I know I probably gave you a really agita by saying, you know, you can't have a concession stand in your bathroom on the beach. So on the ground, right? So here's some alternatives that we've seen lately to that. That actually have been a little bit more friendly now with COVID and stuff. Things on wheels, food trucks, removable items that are only there for like 180 days, which is way more than probably what we need for beach season in Connecticut, are allowed. So things like your ticket booth in the parking lot, it might be way in the back there, so it's not so bad anyway. So like back to this guy, the storm's coming, you remove it, you know, it's there for, it's not, you know, a permanent structure. Maybe it's something easily removed, it's on wheels, or it's on like a trailer with a hitch. Things like maybe there's a pavilion, and again, it's kind of like plug and play, little things that could be left there and then removed. A lot of towns are doing that. Even bathrooms. I know people hate that one, but there's a lot of these nice wedding bathrooms, I call them. You know, they're porta potties, but they're nicer porta potties where they drop them in for the season and they remove them. They're not permanent. Another idea some towns are using. Again, very situational, very where exactly, like Brian said, to how far, which zone you're in is a big point of it. You can move stuff back, awesome. The farther back you move it, sometimes you can't, sometimes you're right, you have a short, shallow beach. It really depends on the site, all right? And I'm leaving now, back to Brian, for somebody, unless you got questions.
Oh, okay.
We're good?
Yeah,
All right,
thank
cool.
you. All right, now we're going to move to some all right, so I don't know how many associations here have groins or jetties, but they are a pain in the butt. And this is where regulatory sins of the past kind of thing, where we might have permitted them permitted them a long time ago. They might have been in a long time ago, and they, you know, if they're pre-95, we can authorize them under a certificate of permission. But essentially, with groins and jetties, even old ones, there's generally a winner and a loser when it comes to groins. So the whole idea of a groin is somebody's trying to trap sand on one side of it. And so the person or the association on the other side of the groin basically doesn't get sand. So what you see is essentially, and I don't know, it's hard to see here, but you can see this here. So you can see how wide, so in this case you can tell that the sand is moving from this corner of the photo to this, because this person put a groin out and the sand is collecting here, and essentially over time what happens is this person is starved of sand, actually even gets erosion. So that's the problem we have is, you know, if someone comes in and they want a groin and, you know, we want a groin, we want to have more sand on our side here, it's our obligation under statute to look at adverse impacts. And if you, on the the winning side of the groin get an extra 20 feet of sand, that means the guy on the losing side is losing 20 feet of sand probably. So we do not like to permit them. We don't recommend them. And even when you come into our office sometimes to rebuild them, we sometimes will make you shorten them or lower them to just allow some sand through. And we can even, we could condition your permit so that you would have to study the adverse effects to say the next person over and put sand. We could try to put a condition in the permit that we would nourish their beach just to save sort of yours, to help yours. Yeah. Did you have a question? Oh. Yeah. Hold on. You need the microphone.
I'm waiting. So with an existing groin that's been in place for, let's say, 75 years.
Yep.
And you need to do repairs to it.
Yep.
On page 4 of this guide,
Yep.
in the groin and jetty section, it says substantial maintenance requires a COP.
Correct.
What does that mean?
So when it comes to groins and jetties, substantial maintenance would be pretty much anything other than just replacing your boards.
Well, what if it's a rock groin?
Any work in the water other than stuff you could do by hand.
So handwork is permitted.
Yes. Technically, no. Technically, no. Any work on a stone groin would require a certificate of permission if you are rebuilding. If one stone falls out and you can push it back in, I'm not regulating. Okay.
Yep.
But so what we see over time is the groin flatten out, right? So at one point you had a nice tight stone groin, and then over time it does this, right? So now you want to take your stone from this wider, lower area and put it back and get it to the height where it used to be, right? That needs a certificate of permission from our office.
Okay.
Yep. So that would, and we would still need to look at if you're having an adverse effect on another down gradient property.
Well, there's always going to be an adverse effect.
Correct. So it's funny, sometimes there isn't, just because of the way like not all stretches of beach are just straight stretches, right? So sometimes you already had a natural point of bedrock or something like that, and you add a groin to that. Sometimes there isn't really an immediate adverse impact, but we still want to look at it. And we're not going to say no if it's 75 years old and either was
Well, it's even older than that.
previously authorized.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's probably an underlying permit for it. So you would need a certificate of permission, and that's just for rebuilding it in kind in place. Any
no additions?
Lengthening, heightening, anything, changing location would be another full permit, and that would be in that column of high cost, a lot of time, study.
Is this something that Deep would want to do a site visit and inspect, or is this done in other ways?
So yes, we would want to see it. I would probably reach out to like permitting people in my office ahead of time, take a look at it. I would ask for all, unless you have them all, I would ask to see the old permits.
Yep.
Leverage, take a look at the file, see if you can leverage any of the information on the old plans. And then I would talk to the permitting staff and see if we have any known issues with the groin, whether we get complaints, because I get complaints all the time about groins. So you may not, I don't know what, and it could be any of your jetties or groins, because, a lot of our permits require stairs over them, fences, steps into them. And, you know, I just had a complaint the other day I think it's in Madison, about someone, new owner. I don't like those steps over my groin. Took them out. They didn't realize that was a condition of their permit. So I would definitely, and if you have a card or you want to leave, I'd be glad to have you get in touch with a permit person, because they probably would want to go and see it and see, you know, because it would be interesting to see if we would let you build it back up to the old height. You know what I mean? Like, so a lot of times we kind of say, well, let's just do status quo, right? We're not getting complaints, the sand, you know, so there may be actually some little give and take on that. So it's worth getting that out front. So yeah, we'd be glad to come and do a site visit and talk to you about it.
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, microphone right here. Yep.
So go back to, so if you have a groin and a portion of that groin is above the CGL line.
Yep.
And another portion is below that. Where's the jurisdiction for deep occur?
So we would, if it's one contiguous structure, we would technically could regulate the whole thing, but we usually just regulate it up to just that CJL. So from that CJL forward would be town. And really, the way groins work, anything above CJL doesn't do anything anyway for the most part. But we would clearly regulate all the way up to the CJL, and we've had times where we sort of hand off to the town. But anytime, if it's a complete structure, we would regulate probably the whole thing. Because we have issues with public act, you know, so, and this is in another slide, mean high water is where private property ends. So waterward of mean high water is public trust. And so that public trust is held for everyone by us, by group. And so we want to make sure if you have a groin that below mean high water, the public can get over through that structure. And that becomes, there's always conflicts with that. But yeah, so pretty much we would specifically regulate up to CJL, and then probably have an interest at least in making sure that the whole design, we'd want to see the whole design. Okay? We'll get, he's new. He's taken too many.
Hi, Mike Zabreski, I'm from Chapman Beach. Given your comments about adverse impact, winners, losers on these groins and jetties, which is hard to debate otherwise. The research that I think we've all been seeing, both from Frank Boland at University of Connecticut, Circa, NOAA, where the sea level, 80% chance of it rising 20 inches in the next 30 years by 1950. Don't want a political debate, don't want to comment on why, but it's pretty widely accepted as a fact. Yeah. Given that, is there anything in either FEMA's thinking or DEEP's thinking on these jetties and groins when we come to you, we want to repair them? I know you're not going to let us build a new one. Given the fact that the functionality of a jetty or groin, as more water flows over it, the less function it has. So
I can tell you the
you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the legal answer currently is no. We're not taking that into account. So the statutes were changed so that we can take into account sea level rise in our planning. But if you look at our statutes, our factors for consideration, it doesn't really say that we need to take into account sea level rise or climate change. We're trying. I would say this. We definitely need to consider it. But the law, the way I read the Coastal Management Act and the Structures and Dredging and Fill, it doesn't tell me anywhere that I can give you extra wall, or I can give you extra groin because of sea level rise. Doesn't say that. So I don't know if it's a matter of the statutes and regulations need to catch up to some of this, but I have not issued a permit that says you get more impact or a bigger structure or a taller structure because of sea level rise. We have not issued one that says that.
So irregardless of any personal opinion or what science says, that's just where the law is
Correct.
currently. Part B of the question. We have 4 structures in place, all common ownership. And our own study says that if we take one of these jetties down, which removes something that deep generally would be in favor of, do we get to trade that off for height or length on the other structures that are remaining?
You know, it's funny, without actually looking at your studies and without actually seeing it, I couldn't tell you if there's any flexibility or not. I don't know. That would be, again, something that would be worthwhile meeting and taking a look at it and seeing what your ideas are. I couldn't tell you yay or nay. I can tell you that taking a groin or jetty out, we would support that. Now, whether we would give you credit
Right.
for that,
Right.
you could use on the other
Right,
one.
it's like a tax credit, right, sure.
But I mean, you know, maybe that's the way we need to start thinking a little bit. I don't know.
So to pursue something like that,
Yeah.
what would the procedure be? I mean, I'm a resident of the beach I'm speaking of, obviously. We have an engineer. We have a program in place to kind of look at all this. And I've had this idea now for a while. Obviously, I do my research, and I just thought that might be kind of a, folksy, good idea, but
So I would start with, now which town?
Chapman Beach and Westbrook.
Westbrook. So that would be Bill Sigmund. He's the supervisor of the East region. I would start with him. He can give you, oh, okay, yeah. So I would start with him. It would be worthwhile if we were going to come and talk to you and see it. It would be worthwhile to have a couple different people involved, just because it may take more than one expertise.
So as a citizen, I have access to Bill Sigmund?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, the one thing remember, too, is when we talk about beach associations, right? So when a beach association comes in for a permit, it has to be the beach association, right? So I've gotten burned a few times when I get someone that represents the beach association, but then someone that's a member that has a differing opinion. So when you come to us, your position would need to be the beach association. You get what I'm saying?
Impossible.
Okay.
I mean, you got 90 people, you can't do everything. But anyhow.
Well, but your association should have some board, some way of voting. So
Okay.
we would require that this would have some.
Well, I'm just talking about to explore options.
Oh, no, to explore is
I'm
fine.
talking about exploring
yeah.
options.
Oh, no.
Not deciding.
We could come out and
Fine.
talk to you,
Thank you.
absolutely. But
Thank you
when,
for
when we move forward
That's
with
totally-
a proposal.
Totally
Yeah,
different.
Okay.
I
Yep.
got that.
All right, good, all right.
Thanks.
Oh, back over there. Boy, groins are hot tonight. I know. Yeah. Make a note, Katie. Groins.
This is quick.
Remove page 12 from the manual.
The only way to identify the CJL is by a survey?
Yes. You can, you know what I mean, like for your own planning purposes, you could probably kind of take a look at, like a good high tide, There is actually phone apps. There's tide gauges, like when we do inspections, you can kind of get an idea. You might have to change datums or whatever, but you go out there during a high tide and then, usually a lot of our gauges around here are mean low water or mean low water. We do NAVD 88. There is a conversion, so you could maybe go out there in high tide, see what it is, and then kind of get an idea. But for our permitting purposes, you would need a land surveyor, yes. Yep. Hold on. Yeah.
That thing. So earlier, I thought you said that you guys were looking into revising the CJLs?
It's gonna, so right now, the CJL is the CJL. We use the last epoch, which I think is 19 years. I don't know if someone knows. So we're going to update at some point, but remember, we're government, so could be 10 years.
That was my next question. When is that going to be done?
I don't know. We're going to need to, because the statute, you know, it only makes sense. If we're, think about it. If we're, so essentially we'd be 40 years behind now. So we will do it. I just don't, I couldn't tell you.
So what happens 40, 50, 100 years from now? Because that's, just kidding. What happens to all the, you know, boats and racks and you know, things that would be forced to change because
yeah, I haven't, no, I don't even,
I'm thinking ahead.
You know, like if you mean like if stuff that was out of our jurisdiction, say it goes from 3.2 to 3.6.
Yeah, whatever.
Oh, geez, I don't even want to think about that.
All right, well.
No, you're right. It would be, so my thought is you'd be grandfathered in.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Just like we've done before when we had mean high water as our, and then the high tide line. Basically, if you got a permit under, just say for whatever, the CJL in this town goes from 3.2 to 3, right? Mm-hmm. If you did your, you know, got your permits and you put your activity in prior, you'd be okay.
Okay, I got you.
It would just be on moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I see someone back there. Whew.
When did permits begin to be issued for groins and jetties?
When do permits get issued?
Yeah, 50 years ago, 100 years ago?
Oh, so actually the structure dredging and fill is 1934.
Okay.
So that's why, so this is a big secret, so maybe stop taping. There's thousands of unauthorized structures right now in Connecticut at this moment. We, little by little, get them. We get them. And I don't know exactly how these all got constructed without permits, but there's a lot. That's why essentially the legislature started with this certificate of permission. That they basically said anything before 95 has been here a long time, so deep you can authorize this, and it's going to be an easier process for property owners and such. But yeah, 1939, I'm sorry. 1939, we used the 1934 aerial photo to see if someone, so sometimes someone says, well, it's grandfathered. This is one of the biggest lies. Is, you know, you buy a property and say, oh yeah, it's all grandfathered. Don't worry, it's all a lie, for the most part. So real estate agents lying, whoever's selling it probably are lying to you. Because not many things show up on the 34 aerial, I can tell you that. Connecticut looks a lot different. And any wooden dock that was put in 1934 must have been rebuilt numerous times and should have gotten a permit from us after that.
Things that were put in, say, before 1995, like you said,
Yep.
You're not going to go around finding all of those and taking them out.
So let's put it this way. We're complaint driven, right? So say you have a groin on your beach association, has no permit. If somebody walks by that groin and says, I don't like it, I'm going to put in a complaint with beach. I will come to you and we'll inspect, and if it doesn't have a permit, we'll send you a notice of non-compliance and say you got to get a permit. We don't generally search these out because we just have a lot to do under, like complaints-wise, we get hundreds of complaints. Hundreds. People that live on the ocean, they have good eyes because they see everything you're doing. I can tell you that for a fact. Someone is, I mean, kayak, that is a common issue, is people putting kayaks in the water and tying them down and anchoring them down. Yeah.
I can vouch for what you're saying because I've had several of your letters addressed to me to have to go to these people and explain to them why their docks need to come out of the water. And I think something that you should be able to tell people is you don't want to investigate whether it's grandfathered in or not, but you should tell them how they can go about checking and finding out if it is. I've had several people that I've given information to so that they can at least try to check and see if their docks are grandfathered in or out. A lot of people that buy properties, like you said, that real estate agents, et cetera, they lie to them. They don't honestly know.
Yes,
And your letters are like, you know, the sheriff of Nottingham coming to collect a pound of flesh. I think it's insensitive, and I think you need to adjust the way you do your business.
Called insensitive.
But you're not the one that has to deal with these people and listen to them yell at me like I'm you. So
I appreciate that you're taking one for the team. That is a great segue. So in addition to this, we actually have another brochure and a poster that exactly addresses that. Basically, it's a way for a property owner to go through and see what they have, what structures they have that are under our jurisdiction, whether they have permits. We have an actual email address that Katie looks at for such inquiries. So you can actually email essentially Katie. She will do the review for you to see if you have a permit.
And one last thing about groins and jetties.
Yep.
You mentioned that the reason you don't want to see them rebuilt is because of the uneven distribution of sand.
Correct.
Okay, that's your only reason?
It's not the only reason, but it's the main reason.
Do you live on the shoreline by any chance?
I do not.
Okay. I have lived here probably 30, 40 years, and I notice every year that our coastal storms are becoming more and more intense. And a lot of these jetties do more than distribute sand unevenly. They deflect a lot of the water coming into shore. And also a lot of these jetties and groins are built around small rivers that are coming out of our larger rivers. And this helps to prevent, the groins help to prevent the sand from actually backing up to prevent these backwaters to back up.
Yep.
So that I can't see how just one thing would give you the feeling that these groins and jetties should not be looked at.
Well, so the difference between a groin and a jetty is a jetty protects the mouth of the outlet of a stream. So that's the difference. A groin is just for beaches, jetties that. For that purpose, we would support a jetty that that allowed for a stream to discharge whatever materials without being blocked for navigation purposes, for wildlife purposes, for fishery, whatever. So, yes, I guess I'm being a little simplistic about the sand being, basically the movement of the sand and the adverse effect on the person on the shadow of it. So, yes, I'm not sure about jetties, how they act and groins act during storm events. But if the groin is solely for the purpose of one individual or a number of individuals getting a nicer beach at the expense of someone else not having sand in a nice beach, we're definitely going to evaluate that. And we can consider that an adverse impact to a coastal resource, which is the other beach, the beach in the shadow of the groin. Okay? May not be fair, and it may be a simplistic view. We would, whatever other issues, we would very well assess whatever other issues someone brought up.
Well, I feel better now only for the fact that you've said you would look at it and not automatically discourage it.
We would always evaluate it. And, we're always going to look at, like I had someone recently in Madison, and someone was complaining about the, the groin, and they were on the wrong side of the groin. I mean, I went back all the way to the 34 aerial front to see overall, you could clearly see before the groin went in, you had, like a uniform beach, and then you saw after, and then they modified it, and so I assessed, so we try to use all the resources we have, aerial photography, it's interesting, Google Earth now is a great enforcement tool for us because, we used to have aerial photos, but it was like every 5 years. Google Earth gives us stuff 6 months. I remember telling someone, hey, you built, they said, oh, I didn't build this. I go, oh, yeah, you did build it. And I know it's between April 2013 and May, 2014 because it wasn't on this Google, and it was on this Google. So yeah, we will assess. I agree. We can never just say no. We always have to have a reason to say no or require modification. Okay?
The people on the wrong side of the jetty seem to have a lot of sand also, where we are. It seems like they wouldn't have as much if there wasn't a jetty. And when I had to deal with you folks, you guys had different maps than the town of Westbrook.
Okay.
I mean, it was very hard to get it coordinated. Do you know if that's been corrected?
I don't know really what you're talking, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, when I had to build a house and I had to get approval from FEMA,
okay.
you guys were using a different set of maps than the town of Westbrook was using.
Oh, well, so the FEMA map might have been updated, right? Yeah, there could have been an updated map that either we weren't using or the town wasn't using.
I don't know, but it was
Base flood elevation
yes.
increased? Yeah.
It was very difficult to get approval because they just said, well, we got different values between.
But so do we require? So either it was a new map, but would the town require a certain, like a foot above base flood versus us?
Tell me the scenario. Again, a little more detail.
Well, to get a permit, you have to go through FEMA,
Well, you're going to the town.
and the town gives it to. Yes, but doesn't the town give it to FEMA? Well, the town said they had to get FEMA's approval.
They have to be consistent with FEMA.
Well, okay, maybe consistent.
Regulations are in the local zoning law, so they still try to say the FEMA reg, but it's in their own zoning. All right, so they're adopting the map that FEMA gives them. Okay, so again, sometimes, especially in coastal towns, they update them. It could be every 5 years, something like that. So if you're looking at an old map, there may have been a new map. That could have been what it is.
I was just saying, for people who have to go get permits, it would be great if FEMA and the towns were on the same page.
They are.
So,
I think maybe you had an old map. I'm guessing from.
I didn't
this
have it.
paragraph.
I had to go to you folks.
All right. Okay. So again, there's multiple jurisdictions depending on what you're doing. It could be you need a seawall permit. That's over here. It could be you need, if it's a house.
It's a house permit.
Okay, then it would be your town. But they're using the FEMA regulations embedded in their zoning regulations.
Okay.
As
All right,
their-
if you
as
say
their
so.
enforcement.
I'm past it now.
Sorry about your.
All right.
But for the second question,
Inconvenient. Yeah.
I've been at the beach for a long time,
Yeah.
and you're right, there are sand in the shadow of a groin. But they seem to have a lot of sand, more so than maybe if there was no groin at all.
It really depends, and that's why we look at them. Every site's unique in a sense. I mean, it's the same physics, but littoral drift can be different at different locations. Yeah, we would have to look at it on a case by case if they came forward with a permit. But yeah, I don't know that area, so I couldn't tell you. But we probably should move on off of groins. All right. might just have a night of groins and jetties if you want us back.
All right, I'll try and go a little quickly through the next one. Yep. All right, so NDDB is a term you'll hear a lot if you're going through the permitting process, and it stands for Natural Diversity Database. And so basically it tracks and protects rare species and critical habitats. So if you're going to get a permit or a certificate of permission, there's going to be a part that is going to ask if any rare species or critical habitats fall within the project area. So if you go online, there is, I think on the next page, it talks more about the maps. But you can find your mapping area, and if your property or project location falls within the stashed area that may contain a critical habitat or rare species, then you have to fill out the Natural Diversity Database application form. So you'd fill out a form, it goes to our wildlife specialists, and they're going to look more closely at that property to see if there's any possible nesting birds, any plant species of concern, and they're going to look at that and they'll give you a review. So if your review letter says that yes, you have a plant species, they might have you do a more depth in review and hire a botanist to come out and identify where those species are with regards to your project. Or they could say there's no species really of concern at that location, you're good to go. Once you get that letter, you can use that to submit your permit application. Going kind of quickly, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. But the big point is we want to protect, for coastal projects, horseshoe crabs nesting and shorebirds that are commonly found in those areas. So beach nesting birds we often find on the shoreline, piping plovers and least terns. So they tend to nest further up on the beach, so if you walk along the water, you're more safe, but they tend to just lay their eggs in the sand. So as we heard earlier, the state will come out if you see a nest and they'll net it off, so that way to help protect it. It's one of the reasons why we don't allow dogs on the beach, especially in the summer, because these nests oftentimes are just there and they're at high risk of getting crushed, and we don't want that. I don't think, in Connecticut, we don't want to see dogs on the beach. We don't have great...
No, I don't mean you don't want to see them. I mean, what's the
state
law?
beaches? Yeah, state beaches.
What about private beaches or beaches?
Okay.
Town of Westbrook, after October 1st, they will allow dogs on the beach up until April 1st. That's it.
I think that's pretty standard across the state for
No,
dogs.
This is a town ordinance.
Well, for Westbrook, but I think other towns have similar standards to that. Behind you?
Yeah, keep in mind, that is only the Westbrook town beaches. There are other beach associations who have beaches and private owners who might have their own rules on dogs.
Yep.
I know our beach association prohibits dogs all year round.
For our permit purposes, though, we're focusing more on the nesting that regards to permits. So, like, if you're going to be raking or doing grading, or you want to install a dock, so that's where we're more concerned, and that's why we have people do the Natural Diversity Database. Also, another species of concern would be horseshoe crabs. So spawning season is mid-May to June, so that's why you'll see that date range as restricted in many permits that you'll apply for. I don't think there's many things for geese.
Laws about what you can do. So you can shoot them?
No, shooting would be would fall under hunting requirements. Hunting season, there's yeah. That would be a different deep department for those. Someone behind.
So I have a question. You've got that month or two there where you're not supposed to do any work on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
So this past year, along the shore here in Westbrook and other towns, we experienced a huge seaweed die-off and deposition on the beach. I mean, yards and yards. How are we supposed to remove that?
Would that be by hand?
Well, so there's a couple different ways. So if you did it by hand, we wouldn't regulate you. If you, that has happened in a couple different towns since I've been working coastal, and they actually got a certificate of permission to allow temporary access of machinery on the beach to remove it. And it was like a unique one, I don't want to say one time, but I'm not sure if it was a storm related.
Not at all.
You could call us and we could probably work something out.
Well,
whether-
we did call you
Yep.
from this building,
Yep.
and no one in your office felt the need to call us back over a 2-week period.
Yeah, sorry.
And I've got residents screaming and yelling that they want this off before the 4th of July because it's stinking and decaying.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, I would say you can always remove by hand. So if you.
This had a stretch of beach 200 feet long, filled a 20 cubic yard dumpster. No one's doing that by hand.
Okay. Yeah,
These people can tell you.
yeah,
They experienced it.
yep. Yeah, I.
Harry, I'm asking from the state perspective.
Yeah.
I get complaints and emails in my
I
office.
apologize, no one returned your call. You could rake it, if you could rake, yeah, you would have to use machinery at that time, we probably could have given you a temporary permit or something.
How long does that take?
So we could have probably depending on if it met the criteria, it wouldn't be an emergency. We have emergency authorizations, probably wouldn't have been an emergency authorization. Probably would have been a temporary authorization or a quick COP. We probably, we could have turned it around in a week or two maybe.
Do you understand what the 4th of July means to this town and the economy and the shore dwellers? And this is the week before that. And they're demanding its removal.
I can't really say, we would try to be as flexible as possible.
So if the town removed it without your waiting on you, we'd be liable for fines and penalties, correct?
It would have been not consistent with the general permit, yes, but I don't think, we don't have to take enforcement, so we would definitely be reasonable. But I would say, unfortunately, if you reached out to us and we didn't reach out back to you, then, that's not good on our part. I would say this, I'm not sure how it was handled, but I wouldn't take enforcement action if you guys went and took it out of there. I don't know, I'm assuming that's the ending of the story, you guys removed it?
So what do we do for the next year when it happens?
Well, so how long, so here's my question. Was it a long-term accumulation of it?
Yeah, it lasted for about 3 weeks. It started. We get seaweed every year on the beach, but a minimal amount.
Yeah.
This was amazing amount. 20, 30 times the normal.
So I would say this, if you're anticipating it happening to some degree next year, probably not a bad idea for us to work something out now and get you like a certificate of permission to do it. And it's a 5-year permit. It would allow you to do that for 5 years. But we'd have to make sure, no tidal wetlands were damaged.
This is strictly beach
Yeah,
that we're
so
talking.
beach, okay, yeah. I would say if it happens every year, probably let's sit down and try to get a application going and give you a certificate of permission to remove it. Where would you take it?
Well, we have an old landfill area. We have
Okay.
places to dispose of it upland.
Okay.
Yeah.
What we've done in the past, when we have situations like that, we notify the health department, and the health department can close the beach because of a health issue, then call Deep and tell them your situation, and you tell them what you're going to do, and you do it.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for 20 years.
But
So-
yeah, we would issue you, I'd try to issue you a 5 to 10 year permit that allowed you to do it annually. And that way you're not caught with a week and not knowing what to do. So we could try that. Okay, you got it?
All right, so another common thing you might see along the coastline is Osprey platforms and perch poles. So these, if you want to put one up, then they're eligible for the general permit for minor coastal structures. There are some requirements for that. So they're in the general permit for minor coastal structures. There's 3 different diagrams that are already like pre-approved. Or if you want to make your own, then you could submit that for the commissioner's approval. So this page in the book is pretty straightforward. If you have any questions, you could feel free to ask or let us know. Repairs, if it's by hand, it's under the general permit. So.
And actually, even if you brought machinery, we wouldn't want you to bring machinery out to Tidal Marsh, but repairing it would be covered by that machinery.
Would that include if it were like in a river, rather than
It depends on what,
Niantic River?
would you be doing it by hand or would you be doing it by barge?
Yeah, have a barge get up to it and put a ladder up there and take off the platform and repair it.
Yeah, I think you could do that under the general permit.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Paddlecraft we touched on earlier, so that would be any manually propelled vessel such as a canoe, a kayak, a raft, stand-up paddleboard, so something you could use in the water that doesn't have a motor. Paddlecrafts do not require any sort of licensing or boating registration, but the storage structures, as we mentioned earlier, if they're installed below the CJL, you would need a permit and to go through deep. But if it's above the CJL, you're going to want to check with your town.
Just put it above. We don't want
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't cinder blocks. I don't want to permit cinder blocks.
What am I talking about? With the swim line permits that are authorized by the state of Connecticut, there are no paddle boards, kayaks, canoes allowed in these swim areas.
Correct.
No vessels at all.
Okay. The Coast Guard says differently regarding these. So who do we follow?
We follow the state.
Okay.
So always follow the most conservative. If you have overlapping jurisdiction, always do the most conservative.
Okay, thank you.
So Paddlecraft, you don't need a license or registration for it, but Deep Boating Department does have if found stickers. I believe Pat has some available here. They're great, so if your paddlecraft ever gets lost or just drifts out to sea randomly, it has your name, your phone number, and someone who finds it can try and contact you or the other phone number, and it saves emergency services a lot of time and effort of thinking there might be some sort of stranded boater or paddlecraft user out at sea. So if you just have your phone number, someone finds your kayak, they call the number, you're safe. We learned that it just floated out way on its own. There's no crisis of someone possibly lost at sea. So these are really great stickers to have if you have any sort of paddlecraft to put that on.
All right. Oh boy. Here we go. All right. So public trust, public access. So a lot of the complaints that we get are about like associations or private property owners either putting signs up or fences up telling the public they can't, it's a private beach or something like that. And so one of the things I just want to make sure you guys understand is that at mean high water is where private property ends. So anything landward of that would be, can be association property, it can be private property. You can fence or put signs and keep people out of those areas above mean high water, okay? But remember, if you put anything, so you have CJL, which is higher up on the beach, that's like a high tide line, you have mean high water, and then you have, Long Island Sound. You put any structures between the CJL and mean high water, you need a permit from our office, even if it's just a rope fence If it's a sign, if I get a complaint about it and it's between CJL and Mean High Water, you either get a permit or you get it out. That's pretty much what our position will be. So just letting you know, so the public at all times can access below mean high water. Certain instances, they probably, a lot of times when we do our permits, we worry about it. There's probably not a lot of, if you have not much beach and mean high water hits a seawall, there's really nowhere for them to walk. But we never allow people, we're never going to tell someone to go on your private property. This is just not the way it is.
Fact of,
Yeah.
oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You pay 4 times the fee, keep it. So we have a little statutory thing that says if you can't cover it under a COP, so that means essentially it's post 95, and you want to keep it, you pay 4 times the fee. So our normal fee is $660. You'd pay 4 times that to keep, because
you
a
didn't-
stretch, it could be 5 feet of fence if you really want
But again,
that.
you're making them pay more because they didn't get the permit initially, right? So it's
Yeah.
sort of a,
Program integrity issue.
okay.
You could remove it and then come in for a permit and pay the regular. Some people, I had a lady that said, I'm keeping it because I don't like the dog coming in, so I'll pay 4 times the fee. I'm going to put signs on it because they hated their neighbor. I'm like, all right. As long as it's above mean high water and it's not in the public trust, doesn't bother me. So Connecticut, we have public trust, public beach. So for any association, don't put any signs, don't put any fencing. The public, we will always support public trust. You will always lose. We had a guy in Stamford. He actually, Nussbaum. There's a court case. You can look it up. He was in Clinton's cabinet, and he was down in Stamford, and he just was sick of those people walking in front of his house. He put a fence out, and we basically issued him notice of violation. He said, I'm not removing it. Issued him a removal order. He appealed it. He lost at Deep. He lost at Superior Court. It's out now. So you will always lose. Do not put anything into the public trust, public beach. All right. All right, this is the same thing, signage and fencing, just because I get those complaints all the time. I don't know, and I get it. I don't live on the water, we've already established that, and I know people probably, if you have property on the water, there's probably people that are not very respectful, and I feel bad, but we're still never going to let you fence off across public roads. Yeah.
No wake warning, because you don't want boaters coming, speeding along 50 feet from the shore. That's still in the public trust area, but
yeah,
can you regulate? The town regulates it by putting.
So that would be a marker. So you would actually get approval from boating. Yeah,
Boating.
yeah. But yeah, even if it was a good sign, it still technically needs a permit from us. Let's put it this way. I don't have to take enforcement. Sometimes we just don't. If it's such a small thing, I'm not gonna waste time, But technically, if someone calls me and says, that sign, I have to do my job. It needs a permit. It needs to either come out or get a permit. Generally, for small things, like I had to tell someone, someone next door had a cinder block and they tied their kayak to it. Cinder block was below Cjl. I'm like, do you really want me to spend thousands of state dollars, hours for a cinder block? And they were like, yes. I called the guy and I said, can you just move your cinder block up on top of your wall, please? All right. Saltwater fishing.
So for fishing in Connecticut, if it's freshwater or saltwater, you need a license. You can get that through our boating department. You could go online and get that. But any kind of fishing in saltwater, marine waters would require a license. And for beach association purposes, You don't want any fishing to happen in your swim area. So just make sure if you have anyone fishing, don't let them fish in your swim area. And then also blue crab fishing. If you're going crabbing, you don't need a license or permit or you could just crab as long as it's between May 1st and November 30th. And for hard shell crabs, you want them to be 5 inches or bigger. And then soft shell crabs, 3.5 inches. That's pretty much it for saltwater fishing. And then for shell fishing, you don't, in Westbrook, I don't think there's any shell fishing allowed. It's prohibited. But shell fishing standards are set by each municipality. So if you go online, you can Google or just go to the website and you can find out what your town municipality says. So I think Clinton, certain areas, there's different requirements. Old Saybrook, I think, is prohibited, but Westbrook is definitely prohibited for shell fishing. Oh, sorry.
Okay. I don't honestly know much about swim areas other than you need a permit from our boating guys. I will say this, that, you know, once you do get a established swim area, you do have restrictions about no vessels in there, no fishing in there. There is a specific permit process. It is sort of a full application. I believe you have to notify the town also. So just be aware that you just can't establish a swim area. It has to be approved by our boating guys. Swim floats. So you can put up to 2 swim floats out under a general permit. There's some limitations. They can't be over 200 square feet. They need to be anchored. You can't chain them to shoreline or anything because you don't want to, I guess, harm anyone. There's certain requirements for the freeboard on them and the marking on them. Trying to think, they should be in your own littoral area. You know, if you don't understand what, so littoral area, if you take your property, whether it's private or association, and you basically extend the property lines out into the water, technically that's your littoral or riparian area. So we try to, you know, don't put, if you have 2 associations next to you, don't put your swim float in the other association's area. And then there's also, you can look, there's a link to our general permit for overall any type of eligibility issues. I think there is a removal. We want them removed from the water, November 15th to April 15th. I touched on this a little bit. We do have general permits, so if there are like hurricanes coming and such, under a general permit with no reporting to us, you can put, like bracing, scaffolding, hay bales, sandbags. You can reposition your sand to create dunes to protect you from any type of flood surge. That you can do without a permit. Anything more than that would require, is called storm response, and our commissioner, based on information from NOAA, would make a declaration that this storm response general permit is now active. You can do much more. You can, if you get any damage, you can repair in kind, in place, under this general permit with no other requirement. And then if it's permitted, you can rebuild it. If it's pre-95, you can rebuild it. There's some limitations in there, but overall it's meant to basically help you if we get what Florida just got. So I guess keep an ear out if we do, say this year, even get something. If our commissioner comes out and says, hey, this GP, probably go in here and get a link to it and just see what you can do to protect your property, and then basically repair your property if we do get a doozy. Yes?
Yeah, hi. Would it be allowed to move sand landward at the end of the season, not for a specific storm, but just for multiple of?
Yes.
Okay.
We have actually issued permits. There are some associations that do that annually. Yes.
Thank you.
So basically, so you would probably need at least a COP from us if you were going to take sand from below the CJL, right? So if you were going to take sand from, say, mean low water and then scrape it, so that's what this association does. They scrape their water up, scrape the sand up, create berms for the winter to protect us. In this case, I mean, there's nothing between the houses and the water almost. So yeah, so I think it's a certificate of permission. It may be a full permit, but it is allowed. I just don't know. It depends on the case on whether it's...
With an access point between piles?
Correct. If you were interested, I could probably send you a copy of the permit most recent one we issued that allowed it.
Right. I'll take that one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is a COP always $660?
So the COP is actually cheaper, $375. A full permit starts at $660, but it's a weird area of encroachment or area of impact. So it starts at $660, and then it's 80 cents per square foot above. So it's 825 feet. Anything more than 825 feet is 80 cents per square foot. I don't know who came up with it. I didn't. But.
So if you had to fix a groin, it'd be $375?
So a fix a groin would be, that's the application. So this sounds great, it's $375, but that is the least of your money, is the $375. The survey is going to be, I don't know, so I've asked kind of, how much is it? It's like 15 grand to get the survey, the engineering, fill out, because filling out the application, like you need to know what you're doing to fill out our application. It's not like you can't go from being a dentist to filling out our application. I mean, not that dentists aren't smart, I'm just saying, but it is not the easiest thing to do, but yeah, so there are ways to make it cheaper. If you've had recent survey, sometimes we'll let you leverage, say, a more recent survey, but from start to finish, the $375 is not the issue.
What about to fix a few boards, like on a groin or something like that?
So if you're just replacing boards, if you have a permit, I think you can just do that under your permit. Like you don't need anything additional from us. So,
and if we can't find the permit, you can?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you look in here, there's a this one here, not this one, unless it's in there too. It's in both. We have a email where you can ask us, give us your address, and we'll see if there's permits there. If you have an underlying permit, you can do routine maintenance on a structure. It's that substantial maintenance when you start rebuilding the entirety of a groin. If you start, say you had to start pulling, like the piles were rotted for a wooden one, and you had half the boards were gone, you'd need to come in for a COP. If you had one board that just cracked, you could put it in. But remember, just because you put a board, you have to. The whole idea is to put it subsurface too. So once you start bringing machinery in and having to excavate, you probably need a full COP. Okay. Just tidal wetlands. I already mentioned it. That we regulate tidal wetlands. It's a coastal resource that we protect. We actually it's a preservationist statute. So we're not supposed to allow almost any impact to tidal wetlands. And if we do, we're going to mitigate it like ratio of dependence at least 3-to-1, maybe 10-to-1. So we really dissuade people from impacting tidal wetlands. Sometimes you have to. Don't get me wrong. DOT has roads and bridges and public infrastructure. But, and that's it. Oh, is that that's the email right there. Yep.
who's responsible for the salt marsh? We have a creek that, that brings the water in and out. Now, the creek seems to be getting clogged.
Okay.
Now, who's responsible to keep that open?
We have, they're called WHAM. And what does WHAM stand for? So they used to be the mosquito management guys. They're called WHAM now, W-A-M, but it's Roger Wolf. And so we actually do, I'm not entirely sure your situation, but we do maintenance on a lot of tide gates and tidal creeks. And if you need maintenance on them, these guys have the low pressure equipment where they can go in and do it. They do it on our parks all the time, Hammonasset and stuff. So the answer is we probably would do it, whether we had an obligation or responsibility for like a tide gate or not. But even if we didn't, we have the right machinery to do it, and is it private property, town property, or state?
It's privately owned.
Privately owned?
Yeah, it's about 7 acre.
Okay.
And it opens up to the
So
to the shoreline.
if it's private property, we probably wouldn't have a responsibility to do it ourselves, but you could either hire our guys to do it or an equivalent consultant.
But you had done it before.
Yeah.
About 20 years ago, they came in with machinery.
Yeah,
and opened it up and.
I could. So if you email me your address and location, Roger Wolf runs that group, and we talk to him all the time. So he would probably know whether he's been out there or not. Yeah. All right. Are we good? Everyone's ready to go to bed? Go home, go to bed? I guess if there's any last questions, not about groins or jetties? Yeah.
I just have one comment to make about the presentation and your booklet. I would suggest that at the end of the booklet, you would have a glossary of terms and your acronyms.
Okay.
So it would make it much more easy for lay people to look at it and understand what you're talking about.
Absolutely, thank you. That was a great comment. And then we do, we use acronyms all the time in terms. So we'll definitely look into that. Thank you. That's a great comment. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. We really do want to be partners in this. So, I feel bad that someone said we didn't return their call. I don't know who they called. I hope it wasn't me. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here tonight. I hope this was informative. You have something to take back with you at the table at the end. If you didn't get a booklet to follow along with, they're on the table. Excuse me. Also, as they mentioned about the lost and found stickers, we have those at the back table as well. But we will be passing them out to all of the beach associations this year, okay? Again, I'd like to thank our students, Mr. Butterworth, and the town, okay? Thank you for coming. Everybody have a good night.